So guys, I've got a confession to make. I was wrong about the fortification in the Necron Codex. I was wrong about something within the Necron Codex, and it's the fortification, the Convergence of the Dominion. I was completely wrong about it, and let's get into it. So the fortification, I've been absolutely slating this thing since it was released in this edition, and yeah, it got even worse when we actually got our command protocols boosted because we didn't need to be within 6 inches of character models because we got it army wide with those command protocols. So the ability that this thing actually has, which is, where is it? It is the dynastic command node, where you have to be within 6 inches of one of these pillars to be able to get the command protocols. That is completely redundant and you don't need it. So I just wrote this thing off and I thought, you know what, why would anybody buy this thing, let alone actually put it into a game? And this is where I was wrong. So for the Arcs of Omen chapter approved, this I believe is now almost an auto-include. It may even be, in fact, an auto-include. Now, we actually did it in our 2000 point list video that we did quite recently, and I've got it in that list. Now, I've already explained a little bit in that video why I've got it. But if you haven't yet watched that video, I mean, I'd urge you to watch it. But if you haven't, I'm now going to explain why I think it is almost an auto-include. So here we go. So first things first, the chapter approved book, the secondary objectives. We've got to talk about them before we begin talking about this actual fortification. So all the Necron secondary objectives were nerfed, every single one of them, and in fact we even lost one with the Code of Combat. All of them are nerfed, so it's forcing us to go into the generic options within the secondary objectives for things such as RBD, raise the banners, behind enemy lines, engage on all fronts, all those kind of generic options. We're now forced to look at them a bit more closely because we're not just going to be sticking to Treasures of Aeons, Ancient Machineries, and definitely not Purge the Vermin at the moment because that one is also no good at the minute. So one of the ones I want to look at in particular for this video is behind enemy lines. This one was one of the very few secondaries that actually got a buff with this chapter approved. So you only need to get 1 unit behind enemy lines to score 3 victory points, where previously it was just 2. So a lot more people are now going towards behind enemy lines just because of that alone. And that isn't just other people, that's also us Necron players too, because as mentioned, our secondaries have got a bit, they're okay, but yeah, a bit lackluster compared to previous editions. So, what does that mean? Well, with this fortification, let's begin. You're going to have 3 of them. You split them up into 3, they've got to be wholly within 12 inches of one another. For 80 points, you're getting all 3 models. It's not 80 points per model, it's 80 points for the 3. So if you divide 80 points by 3, that's 26.66666, whatever. So 26 points for a large model, or 3 large models that you're going to be putting in your own deployment zone. So when you're putting them 12 inches apart, you have effectively created a very cheap screen for anti-deep strike, for things such as strategic reserves, which are also free now because units are going to be popping out from the side of the battlefield, turn 2, turn 3, they're going to be popping in. And yeah, if you've got this thing there, they need to have that 9-inch restriction, whether it's deep strike, strategic reserves. You're going to create that 9-inch buffer from our deployment zone or other enemy units, or even just things that you don't want your opponent to get to. Maybe there's objectives in there too. So yeah, it's a very cheap screen. Yes, you can use Canoptic Scarabs, but that's 45 for 3 models, and those 3 models have got a 6+ armor save, they're toughness 3. These things are toughness 8 with 10 wounds. Yes, they can't do anything in combat, but your opponent is not going to want to target them because they're not doing anything, but they are doing something. They're completely screening off deep strike and strategic reserves, which effectively stops them from doing behind enemy lines in some cases. Now that's part 1. As for part 2 of this video, well, it's still to do with behind enemy lines, but it's now for us, for Necron players to select behind enemy lines and use these to our advantage. Now of course you can't be deploying these things behind enemy lines and they can't move, so what are we going to do about it? How are we going to score behind enemy lines with these forts? Well, if you look into the actual datasheet of these forts, the translocation protocols, which is an action done by a cryptek model that's within 3 inches of one of these pillars. Now the chances are you're going to be taking a Technomancer or a Chronomancer in your list, and yeah, you just got to do the action. It comes off the battlefield, goes into reinforcements, and then on your next movement phase you can pop this in anywhere on the battlefield more than 9 inches away from enemy models. If you can manage to get one of these pillars behind enemy lines, you're going to be scoring at least 3 points, possibly 4 points if you've got another unit behind enemy lines. But as mentioned, it's got toughness 8, 10 wounds. It's not going to cause a threat to your opponent, so they're not going to want to target it, but they now need to target it because you're going to rack up points with your secondaries. So they're going to be wasting attacks on toughness 8, on our toughness 8 model, which is fantastic for us, for only 26.666 points. You can actually do this a second time, even a third time, with the other 2 models. Of course, there may not always be space, it may not actually work, and going up against certain factions such as Astro Militarum, for example, or Tau, you might not find a gap. But in a 2K game, the map size is quite big. You never know. When you're pairing it with things such as raise the banners as well, if you start raising banners in your half of the battlefield, that's going to force your opponent to come forward to deal with your banners, which exposes big gaps in their back lines for behind enemy lines. Furthermore, these things are core because they've got the vehicle keyword, so you could actually use the Veil of Darkness relic on these things and actually get them in behind enemy lines within the same turn, which I think is pretty good. You can literally do Veil of Darkness, pop in, another Chronomancer or Technomancer can do the action to put that into reinforcements. If you can get 2 of these things behind enemy lines, that's just game, isn't it? You've pretty much maximised that secondary for sure. There's no way they're going to want to target those things. If they do, who cares? 26.6 points per model. Absolute max you've only spent is 80. I think it's an absolute game changer for me for this chapter approved edition. So yeah, was I wrong? Yes and no. I mean, obviously this chapter approved is only quite recent, and I probably wouldn't have used this in any previous chapter approved books because we didn't need to always use behind enemy lines. We had our own secondaries that were pretty decent, and we were scoring maximum points from it, especially if you got the Obsec dynasties. But yeah, now that we are using those generic options, I think these are definitely a go-to. Now, quick editing, just forgot about their ranged weapons for the video. They got the transdimensional abductors, 12-inch range, assault D3, strength 4, -3, and 3 damage. Each one of these units, or each one of these models, is going to be carrying that weapon. So I was saying previously in this video that they're not doing much at range. Yeah, that isn't the best, don't get me wrong. 12-inch range isn't that great. Assault D3 is a bit unpredictable. Strength 4, meh. But -3 AP and 3 damage is actually not too bad. You can literally pop off a Terminator or 2 in combination with all 3 of these models. So I just wanted to throw that in here because I didn't want people in the comments saying, you forgot about the range attacks, because yeah, I nearly did, but not this time. So guys, let me know in the comments, tell me what you think. Are you now using them? Do you own any of these models? Are you going to get hold of some? Let me know down in the comments below how you think these are going to fare in this chapter approved book. So guys, thank you all for watching, and as always, I'm going to see you in the next one.